Programming of the Rockefeller Foundation, Michael Myers.
Good afternoon. After a wonderfully inspirational and challenging morning, for the remainder of the summit, we roll up our sleeves and get to work. So we'll start the afternoon with a discussion of innovation, and then we'll round out the afternoon with a conversation among the ministers who are present in our proceedings today. Then this evening, please join us for dinner, and we have some entertainment I think that you will find very enjoyable. I had the opportunity to view their performance last night, and it's really quite wonderful. Tomorrow, those of you who can, please join us for a working session that begins at 9 o'clock in Congress Hall, where we are today. And in that session, we will break up into small groups and really have a deeper discussion of some of the ideas that emerged from the conversations during the course of this day. So please join us, participate. We try as much as possible to have plenty of time for you to ask questions of panelists and of each other so that there's a real interaction and a real conversation as we proceed with this summit. So now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome to the stage Mr. Dieborn Chibonga, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Smallholder Farmers Association of Malawi, and two of our Innovation Spotlight presenters. Please welcome Mr. Chibonga.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Innovation Spotlights. We have two presentations this afternoon to talk about innovations in agriculture. In trying to feed rising populations, we need to be talking about agricultural value chains. And we can't be using 18th century tools and innovations in order to feed the 21st century. So this afternoon, we are going to talk about two innovations. And first of all, let me welcome Peter Bolt, who is CEO of DADCO. Can you welcome him, please? Thank you. And Christina Ulrich, who is from Swiss Re. She is the head of market development in Africa. Welcome her, please. First, we'll see a short video about DADCO and what they're trying to do in introducing innovations in Africa. DADCO.
Here in northern Mozambique's Nampula province, smallholder farmers are planting the seeds of something new, a viable commercial cassava industry. Cassava is a hugely important crop here, but it has one major flaw. Just 2 days after it gets pulled from the ground, it begins to rot. Add to that poor roads and plant disease, and suddenly cassava is out of the running as a cash crop. That could be changing, however, thanks largely to two organizations, privately held DADCO from the Netherlands and the U.S. nonprofit IFDC. The pair hope to commercialize the cassava production of 1,500 farms by linking them to markets more efficiently. At the heart of the project is DADCO's Autonomous Mobile Processing Units, or AMPUs. These factories on wheels wash, peel, and pulverize cassava into a moist pulp just hours after it is harvested. This packaged pulp has a shelf life of 2 years. DADCO guarantees farmers about $50 for every metric ton of unprocessed cassava, the first price stability these farmers have ever seen. That alone has made DADCO a popular option.
So, Peter, what is so innovative about this program that you have?
If you look in Africa and you see that cassava is one of the major crops, and you see that cassava is one of the best crops for starch, and you see that Africa is importing all of its starch, we wondered 10 years ago, why is Africa not processing its own cassava? Why import syrup made from corn in the United States? Why import tapioca from Thailand? While the largest producer of cassava in the world, Nigeria and Africa, are not processing it. And we saw about 10, 12 years ago that it was due to the fact that the roots are so perishable and that the smallholder farmers are so widely scattered that they could never arrange the logistics from the field into the factory. And if you look today in Africa, you will find about 30, 40 big factories, centralized, which are standing idle since a long time. So 10 years ago, we said what we must do is bring the factory to the farmer. We must try to make a mobile platform which allows us to go to the farmer and process the root in front of him and make an intermediate product we call cassava cake, which is having a shelf life of at least 3 to 6 months. Today, we can shelf that product up to 2 years. So from a raw material, roots, which rot within 48 hours, we have changed it into a product which can stay there for about 2 years. And we have also seen that all the cassava in Africa is grown by smallholders. It's a perfect smallholders crop. And that was one of the visions we had in our company. We want to work as much as possible with these smallholders and link them to the market of big people. We produce cassava cake, we call it, for the breweries. They use it to make beer. In Mozambique, it's called Impala beer. We produce cassava cake, which can be used to make flour. In Nigeria, we make flour, which under the inclusion degree of the government of Nigeria is blended with wheat flour. So it reduces wheat flour. Right. It can also be used to make syrups. The Coca-Cola and the soft drink industry in Nigeria, for example, is importing nearly 300,000 tons of syrups per year. Can all be made with local cassava cake. And we started 10 years ago, and we have built many plants in Nigeria, and we are spreading at the moment all over Africa. We see as a big advantage that we link smallholder farmers directly to the end user. Right. And that is what our mobile platform is doing.
So is the smallholder farmer really benefiting, or are you making all the money?
We are paying part of the money. We're not there for losses. But normally we pay 1.5 times to 2 times more than the local food market. However, what we see also, we try to get the farmer away from local varieties into high-yielding varieties. So normally our farmers were at 5 to 8 tons per hectare. In the first year of contact, we try to bring new varieties to them, which are developed by the IATA. And we try to raise production to 15, 20, 30 tons per hectare. In Nigeria, in the first year, we go up to 35, 40 tons per hectare. So a farmer growing 5 to 8 tons per hectare before is now growing 35. That's not due to us. It's due to all the work done by the IATA.
All right. Yeah. What are some of the main challenges that you faced in introducing mobile cassava processing?
In many countries in Africa, we find that the import cartels of staple commodities like wheat or like sugar or like rice do not often allow local production to start. The interest of those import cartels is in importing, not in local production. So that is one of the major obstacles we have never expected, but we are meeting that wall all the time. I think second challenge for us, and we are a very small company, we are maybe 200 people, is to get, we want to go to scale. We are at the moment working in 4 countries, and we want to go to 27 countries. To go to scale and touch millions of farmers, we need expansion finance, and that is extremely difficult.
Well, you have got ministers of finance here, ministers of agriculture, and a lot of companies, CEOs, and so on. What message can you bring to our audience this afternoon?
I think that what we have proven, not alone, but with the smallholder farmers of Africa, that there is dignity in farming. There's a commercial basis for farming in Africa. We have shown that there are multinationals, and I can call them Unilever, Cargill, Ingredient, Submiller, Heineken, Guinness, all willing to use local products, all willing to use that local product to avoid their importation. In South Sudan, we are talking about stopping importing malted barley to use cassava cake for a new beer. In Nigeria, we're talking with Unilever, very far already, producing sorbitol from cassava cake. Sorbitol, which is for toothpaste. So I think what we have shown is that smallholder farmers in Africa can be commercial, can have a future, and they can deliver a high-quality product directly to the industry.
All right. Thank you. Turning to Swiss Re. Can we see the video on Swiss Re first?
925 million people on our planet are hungry. That's more than the population of the US, Canada, and the European Union combined. And within the next 4 decades, up to 200 million more people could face hunger as a result of climate change. Climate change brings uncertainty. Sometimes too much rain or too little. It means unpredictable harvests. And for many farmers, a healthy harvest is their only source of food and income. Without reserves, one failed harvest could mean families go hungry, kids drop out of school, and people sink deeper into poverty, making it harder for families to plan for the future. Through a new partnership, Oxfam and the World Food Programme are tackling that problem together with Swiss Re. The program is called R4, the Rural Resilience Initiative. It gives rural families the opportunity to manage their own risks, harvest to harvest. It's based on the fact it costs less to manage risks than it does to provide relief in a crisis. The Rural Resilience Initiative. It encourages farmers to save, it improves their access to loans, and it provides them with a common tool many people in developed countries take for granted: insurance. The insurance provides farmers with compensation for their crops when rain fails to fall. Originally called Harita, the program started in Tigray, Ethiopia, with REST, one of the founding members. It offered weather insurance for 200 households that conventional wisdom said were too poor to afford it. The initiative allows the poorest farmers to pay for their insurance by working on community projects that improve local agriculture, reduce the impacts of disaster, and help them adapt to a changing climate. Through insurance for work, they build irrigation systems, which help crops thrive during dry spells. They make compost to fertilize the fields. They reclaim the degraded environment by planting trees. And since work is one of a farmer's surest assets, by trading it for insurance, farmers with little else can build and protect their future. Farmers can grow their savings to cushion the hard times. They can secure the credit they need to buy the equipment and drought-resistant seeds that promise bigger and better crops. They can launch small businesses that will help feed their families and ensure their children stay in school. So when you invest in rural resilience, you're helping farmers, their families, and their communities become stronger. What started with 200 households has reached 13,000 over 3 years and will expand to 3 more countries, growing village by village, border to border. Managing risks costs less than managing a crisis. Rural resilience. It just makes sense.
That's very impressive. But Swiss Re has been known for international financing and risk reduction. But smallholders and in Africa, what's the take here?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to present. And it's not really about Swiss Re only. I mean, what you saw in the video is a partnership between the World Food Programme, Oxfam, a lot of local stakeholders. And the take here is that insurance penetration everywhere is very low. And yes, there is at the moment very little to insure for smallholder farmers. However, if you build the financial system and if you build the agri-value chain, if there is access to inputs, seeds, fertilizer, if there is off-taker schemes, access to markets, we have just heard about this, then farmers become a market, and they become a market for Swiss Re, and they're insurable. So the innovation about R4 is not so much the insurance part, because we know how to technically put that in place, but that it's actually linked to other components which are needed, such as the credit and the savings, the financial infrastructure, and hopefully at some stage, the access to market.
We've heard of weather risk insurances in various countries starting and failing. What is the winning formula in terms of the one that Swiss Re is doing?
I think the winning formula here is really that you have the asset creation. Because if you ask somebody to take out insurance in a worst case scenario, well, in a best case scenario, you pay and you get nothing. So there is a lot of financial education tied to insurance, because if your season is good, you have paid for insurance, but there is nothing you potentially gain. So what we need to do is we need to bundle insurance with something that creates value, such as, for example, a credit. And if, for example, you have a scenario where farmers were previously deemed uncredit-worthy, and all of a sudden they can take out the credit, and the insurance is perhaps, part of the interest rate, then the whole value creation becomes a very different one. And what we have seen on the ground is that the products that are actually bundled to either the loans or the inputs or some of the off-taker arrangements are the ones that survive and that drive.
In agriculture, in the past, extension has been left to government, and we know that extension has failed in many cases, and other players have come on board. In this case, who should be responsible for educating farmers about these financial products?
Well, that's a very good question, and I don't think I have an answer that fits it all, because we have different models. We have partners, for example, whom we work with in Kenya that are insurance service providers. One example being Kilimu Salama, which some of you may know. And they're specialized in providing the insurance product, and they also do the training on the insurance. Where we work with R4, for example, we have the local partners such as REST in Ethiopia doing a lot of the training, Oxfam America, some of it the World Food Program. So a lot of the NGOs and the partners have stepped in to do the financial literacy, if you so will.
Mm-hmm. What are the main challenges that you're facing as a company and as partners?
Well, you heard in the video, for example, through the R4 program, we currently reach about 20,000 people in Ethiopia, 76 villages. And that's really just a starting point. There is millions of farmers, not only in Ethiopia, but also in Senegal, where we move next, in Kenya. So for us, at the moment, the challenge is to scale. And how do you reach scale? How do you make it possible to reach the millions of farmers that you would want to reach in terms of the credit services, the insurance, the inputs, the access to the market? And that's an operational, institutional challenge in my point of view.
In most insurance products, there's always very fine print that they don't tell you about, that if they are acts of God, that you are not covered. No. Is there any small print that we should be aware of with Swiss Re?
No, we don't have that with weather index insurance. With index insurance, it's actually very simple. It's very often the trigger is based on rainfall. So we monitor the rainfall at either rainfall stations or through satellites. And we can do that, and by the way, the farmers can do that as well. They have their mobile phones, and they can, for example, see the rainfall station data as it comes out. So they actually know whenever they're eligible for a claim. And we have farmers in Kenya calling their insurance company saying, we know that we get a claim because we monitor the rainfall data. So there is no fine print with this insurance.
Weather stations are key in reinsurance. In a lot of cases, the weather stations are outdated and they are not automated. How do you face that challenge?
We started working with a lot of weather station physical stations and then implemented also new ones. We increasingly work with satellite data, and satellites are around. They monitor for the past 20, 30 years. They are available. So technologically, we are being able to design products that don't necessarily rely only on ground station. Then the challenge becomes the farmer education. Mm-hmm. How do you explain to a farmer that a very remote satellite flying in the air delivering proxy data is something that you're going to base your insurance on?
Sometimes there's a challenge that the weather station shows that it has rained within a certain radius, but localized with the farmer, it has not rained on that farm, and therefore the farmer comes forward to make a claim. How do you deal with such challenges?
See, with that type of insurance that we are talking about, where you, for example, say you base your claims on rainfall, it actually can happen that you experience a drought, but the station data is better than the situation on your farm. So it needs to be made very clear upfront what it is that it's settled on. And what we also do increasingly when we work through aggregator, we try to balance that. For example, if you work with a credit union or if you work with a farmers group, you can take out a policy on a group level, something that's been aggregated, And then the individual effect on the individual farms, they disappear a bit.
Okay. Thank you. Turning back to you, Peter. What are the plans for other crops, other countries scaling up?
We are at the moment in Ghana, Nigeria, Mozambique. We are starting in Zambia, South Sudan, Kenya, Tanzania, all in cassava. And we think we have in total 27 countries to cover in Africa in the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. We're trying to attract multinationals to join the party because we think, first of all, we should work on import substitution. If you import 250,000 tons per year of syrups and you're paying $1,100 per ton for that, there is no reason at all to start exporting for $300 per ton. First, do your import substitution and then move the export. I've lived now 41 years in Africa. I have the strongest belief that Africa is the future for agriculture worldwide. Because we are the continent which has the reserves, which has the land, which has the natural resources. We only have to prove it. Right. And I think we'll prove it in the next couple of years. I have no doubt in my mind about it.
Okay. Well, you have got an illustrious gathering here of public sector, private sector, NGOs. Any last words that you want to give to our audience this afternoon?
Yeah, I will be a bit political on that. Right. And I think, again, that we should have great belief in our own strengths as Africans. We have an agriculture which is considered by most people as very backward. I think that time is behind us. Right. The cassava example has shown that it is eminently possible to work with smallholder farmers who come from subsistence, go to commercial, and link them directly to multinationals like Unilever with very high standard products and completely abolish imports. Now, on the abolishment of the imports, you need government. And the government of Nigeria has been very forward in that, has made the cassava flour inclusion decree, is enforcing it, has slapped temporarily import duties on products to make local production more attractive to investors. And I think that's what we should be going for. In the next 5 to 10 years, Africa will show the rest of the world that agriculture in Africa is the way to go to. And that's my advice. Don't be very dignified about your own agriculture.
Okay, thank you. Christina, last words?
Well, I'll be very practical as a private sector person. We know how to insure smallholder farmers. Technologically speaking, we know how to do it. What we need is banking partners supplying the credit. We need partners that support with the implementation. And looking at Nigeria, for example, where I sit today, we don't have index insurance in Nigeria. So I would very much welcome anyone who wants to work with us or partners like the World Food Programme, Oxfam, to scale R4.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a future in African agriculture, but it all depends on all of us gathered here this afternoon. Let's give a hand to our panel. Thank you so much. Have a blessed afternoon. Thank you.
Ladies first now.
Thank you.
In Burkina Faso, Adjepong-Boateng is leading a network of farmers, seed companies, researchers, and exporters in the West Africa Seed Program, known as WASP. Its mission is to increase the production and supply of improved seeds and then help get these new seeds into the hands of small-scale farmers.
So it's important as a country like Burkina Faso to modernize and to diversify its agriculture. And we start with quality seed, with good yield.
One particularly innovative way that WASP works is by collaborating with seed companies to train local farmers to become seed producers. These trained seed producers then teach other farmers how to grow the improved varieties.
In my career, I have tested a lot of different way of teaching and training farmers. And I learned that when we bring farmers together, it is very easy for them to learn from other farmers because they know they are in the same condition and they can understand better from the farmers.
Nea says WASP concentrates on seeds because high-quality seeds lead to good yields, and a changing climate requires constant work on improved seed varieties.
We are now in the climate change area. So farmers are also demanding more and more better variety which can yield more compared to those that we have in the past.
Every new seed variety requires specific growing techniques, and if grown well, will benefit farmers.
So when the farmer travels to another place or attend a field day, he learns new technology so that back home he can improve his crop management, he can get better yield. So if he gets better yield, he can have more food to feed his family, he can keep some and sell and have some cash for his family.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, Kofi Adjepong-Boateng, and his panel to the stage.
I think you're first, yeah. Oops, she dropped a piece of paper there. Right. I trust the mic is on. It is, okay. Thank you everyone for coming here this afternoon. We have I have to my left a distinguished panel who are here to debate the broad question of innovation in agriculture and how innovation has and continues to form an important part of achieving the objective of stimulating agriculture production on this continent and from some of the examples and elsewhere. Perhaps the best way to proceed is to ask the panelists to very, very quickly introduce themselves in literally half a second so that we can get going. And if I could start, Josette, with you.
I'm Josette Sheeran. I'm currently and newly the president and CEO of the Asia Society, which is another Rockefeller institution that does quite a bit of work in this area. And I was formerly vice chair of the World Economic Forum and working on Grow Africa with Arnie Cartridge, who's here, and others. And before that, head of the United Nations World Food Program, and working with my advisor and leader, Jacques Diouf, and others in that role.
Thank you. Rudy?
My name is Rudy Rabbinge. I am a former professor in Wageningen University in the Netherlands, well-known agricultural university. I've been involved in international agricultural research, leading the Science Council of the Consultative Group of International Agricultural Research. I've been very heavily involved in realizing the promise and potential of African agriculture early this century, which led to considerable changes over the last 10 years in agriculture in Africa, and I'm very pleased that I have the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Rudy. Mxolisi?
My name is Mbetse. As you can hear, Kofi can pronounce my name pretty well. And the reason for that is that I worked with him 15 years ago when I was the chairman of UBS in South Africa. So my background is banking, and I am currently the chairman of IDG.
Thank you. Jane?
I'm Jane Karuku. I'm president of AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. We work through a granting mechanism to unblock barriers across the value chain from seed to the table.
And Jacques?
Well, I'm Jacques Diouf. I'm the former Director General of FAO, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, and I'm presently Minister Personal Advisor to the President of Senegal.
Thank you. As you can see, it's a decent mixture of people with a very close association with food and close association with money, as well as other things, I'm sure. But could I start off, Jacques, by asking you, you've had a long experience, long career in the fields that are of interest to all of us here. What is innovation? What does it mean to talk about innovation in this sector?
Well, it is stopping to do things business as usual and try to do things differently and more efficiently. In this particular case, the main changes came from a biological revolution. Right. High-yielding varieties, creating conditions with short straw varieties to put huge amounts of fertilizer and other input to increase production and productivity. I think this approach is reaching its limits beyond the period of 3% increase, for example, in the yields of cereals in the 70s. We went down to only 1.5% in the 80s, and in the 90s, 1.8%. It means that we have to look at the opportunities elsewhere, naturally being understood that Africa is still not using enough seeds, not enough fertilizer. But I think the main opportunities will come now from a combination of essentially the cellular phone technology and the geographic information systems that are available. I believe that one of the big problems has always been the number of farmers, 60 to 80% of the population, but the fact also that they are scattered in a very wide area. So if we are able to combine those two technologies, we will be in a better position now to reach out to all these farmers, keeping in mind that one of the greatest penetration of the cellular phone in the world is now in Africa. And naturally with the satellite, we can access the possibility of knowing the situation in different countries, but also being able to transfer information, data, etc. And I think this is the new frontier to be combined naturally with the need for the biological revolution to be put at the disposal of the farmers.
Right. So to your mind, in your experience, just picking on what you've just said, you've seen innovation largely in the form of science on the technological side, as well as in the form of technology. If I could just turn to Josette, and I'll come back to you, just because I'm sure you want to comment on what I've just said. Listening to Jacques, is that your experience in the World Food Program, what you saw?
Well, I think at the World Food Program, we literally had to look at the problem from a completely different angle, even though they meet in a very essential way. And so the World Food Program is really charged with the responsibility in the global system to address those who are desperately hungry and won't make it till the next day unless there's an intervention. And when you look at the problem from the perspective of why is it that 1 billion people on Earth can't find enough food, it drives you through the question in a different way. And I will just say that I think innovation really is at the heart of what we're talking about here. I think the Rockefeller Foundation, I compliment them, and I just want to hold up this book because it's the 100 years of history, but it's 100 years of innovation in this field. If you look at innovation, there's a great book called The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. And it talks about why great companies fail if they fail to innovate. And so 80% of the companies that were the big names in the 1980s in the US are now gone. And we would think that governments, if they don't innovate to meet the food and agricultural needs of their populations, maybe they wouldn't fail until December 17th, 2010, when a vegetable stand seller could not even buy and sell food in Tunisia. And his frustration with that really launched a revolution. And so I just want to say that innovation in this space is really not an option. And even though we thought maybe governments didn't have to be as innovative, they really do, to ask the question, why is it such a huge amount of the population is not getting food? And I will just say that we'll talk more about it, but I think in addition to the science, we have to look at innovation in how we help build supply chains, how we ensure people get access to food, and simple things like the idea we had at the World Food Program with the Gates Foundation and Howard Buffett to purchasing for progress, to buy the food to help meet hungry people from the very farmers who may get food aid, caused a revolution. So it's also in our systems and our processes and policies that I think innovation is desperately needed in this space.
Right. Jane, you deal with smallholder farmers, of whom a large majority are actually women. Have you come across innovations which strike you as being in any way catalytic, as being in any way of scale? What's your experience of innovation?
Kofi, I think there's a lot of innovation going on, and I think we need to start being more optimistic about it. I think just the fact that we are seeing increased adoption, use of new seed varieties is indeed innovation at hand with the smallholder farmers. Is it where we want to be? Not yet, and I think that's where the challenge is, and I'm sure later we'll discuss it, how we can get it to the next level. Around AGRA's work, we've seen a lot of innovations around the continent, and I want to share just a few, if you allow me. The first one I want to share is about working with farmer groups in Burkina Faso to address a challenge, post-harvest loss. Post-harvest loss, a lot of people estimate to be 30%, but I think the answer is we really don't know, because we lose crops from harvest, storage, and even post-storage, going to the market, etc. And in Burkina Faso, we worked with a group of farmers, women, called FEPA, and we help them get organized and give them a system in getting very appropriate technology, not even very high-level technology of threshing cowpea and maize, etc. And then working with bags, triple-line bags that don't allow moisture or insects or pests to get in. And then having sort of a storage system that allows them to weigh out the market prices, and using ICT to give them information both for input and output. That is innovation, and the reason I call it innovation is that traditionally, they would have relied on the government for storage facilities. They would have relied on extension officers for agronomy. They would have relied on government for market information or government to buy the food from them. But governments no longer play that role. So women groups and farmers are coming together and helping themselves with the knowledge, with technology, and even with appropriate technology to take them to the next level, and using the high, rapid penetration of mobile telephony we are seeing in the continent. Another one, I'll give an example, is Kenya, where we have a group of women who are farming from green grams and maize and other crops. But nobody can lend them money because they don't even know how to fill a form to apply for a loan in a bank. So we work with those farmers to teach them financial literacy, which I think in itself is a very simple thing, but is innovative. Because if you imagine, we also struggle to borrow money for certain projects. Now imagine a smallholder farmer talking to a big bank. So we work with them and empower them with the knowledge, and also de-risk the chain of their crop value chain so that they can have security or collateral to go and borrow from a bank. So maybe,
right.
Yeah.
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
We've heard from the first three panelists a lot about technology, seed varieties, and the like. But I'd like to turn to you, Mxolisi, on something which I don't think anyone's put an emphasis on: property rights. South Africa is one of the few countries that's trying to reinvent itself in the modern era. Property rights, what do you see?
Thanks, Kofi. Indeed, this is a very highly contested issue, the question of ownership of land. And probably let me hasten to say that one other issue which is critical to understand for all of us who are sitting here is the fact that there is a correlation, if not probably a relationship between food security and political stability. And indeed, you know, it's very interesting to see this particular government putting so much emphasis on the question of food security, because we can all come to Nigeria and invest, but if there is no guarantee for the future in terms of political stability, we might as well pack our bags and go. So from that point of view of making the point that indeed food security and political stability are addressed, it's a very important issue. So the question of land ownership is critical, because at the end of the day, you want to look at land as an asset. And I think that the reason the president this morning was saying that they would like to see more Nigerians getting into farming is simply because in the past people didn't understand that land is an asset. And how do you treat it if it's an asset? From, you know, is it different from other assets or not? But here in Nigeria, the difference between Nigeria and South Africa is the fact that in South Africa, there's land which is owned by the government, but there's a big chunk of land which is owned by the government. I mean, which is owned by the private farmers, the private sector, which becomes very difficult if you want to go and invest there, because it means then that you go to purchase that land. In Nigeria, it's different. The government is a custodian of land. And I spent some time with Barbara and the land commissioner from Edo State to understand exactly all these issues, such that when one comes and invests in this part of the world, understand where is the land sitting. Because where we are migrating into commercial farming, we need to understand when you are sitting on the other side with investors asking you a question, so who owns the land? You got to explain to them that, you know, you are leasing the land from the government. And the next question, of course, how many years? What is the guarantee? Does the government have the discretion at any given moment to say, we can just cancel the contract and take this land from you, or they don't? And last night, we spent some time, because we're looking at some MOUs between Edo State and ourselves to understand those issues. And it needs to be understood because the whole question of off-take agreement in the agricultural sector is not different from the mining sector, where in South Africa, you know, Anglo-American does not own, you know, basically they have got a user right, but they don't own the land which they're operating in. Now, at the end of the day, how do you commercialize it in such a way that you can get an off-take agreement? Because you can produce as much food as you want, but if on the other side there are no off-takers who are going to process and they put the food in grocery shops and all that, there is no use. So Nigeria, in moving forward, need to make it a point that the question of, you know, ownership, and indeed, if you don't own the land, that's fine, but the question of how many years do you get the lease, it needs to be clarified. Right. Because, you know, people are going to put money, but more often than not, it's OPM, other people's money. And when you go and say to them, you want to raise 100 million, because that's where we're moving to. The question of building large sugar mills costs money. You're talking about probably a simple plant somewhere region of 80 to 100 million. It's not the money which anybody will take out of his pocket. You are going to get that money from investors. And they will ask you all these questions. And you need to answer those questions in terms of who owns the land. So it's a very critical issue. And indeed, the question in Zimbabwe, we saw it, you know, causing some serious problem because of the question of ownership. Right. But in West Africa, and particularly in this country, it's interesting because the government is a custodian of land. Right. And you know, you can come to the government, you talk to the government, you can sign them, you can go to the state. So there is a whole issues which are critical and are clarified. And South Africa and Zimbabwe is a different case, simply because we have got big chunk of lands which are all owned privately. Right. And that's what basically is causing a problem in South Africa. And the government came in and they privatized, you know, some of the land. They took the land from farmers, and those farmers, some of them are the farmers who are working with me right now, trying to lure them to Nigeria, to say that, you know, you have got all the skills, and we do need South African farmers because they're very skilled in this area, but they want clarity on land right because their experience as far as Zimbabwe and South Africa is very bad.
Rudy, you've listened to these different views. As a trained biologist and an academic, do you still have a role? Does science still have a role in innovation? Or are we now at a stage where it's property rights and technology and these other fanciful concepts?
I think the need for science and technology is even increasing. If we would like to do more with less, so we have higher productivity, and we would like to do it with less input and less environmental side effects, we have to have sophisticated ways of producing. That requires science and technology and a good understanding. And during the last 10 years, we have demonstrated that that can be done. And when one of the former presidents of the Rockefeller Foundation, Gordon Conway, indicated that there should be a double green revolution, it's being done at different places. And that's based on the understanding of how living systems function and how we can fine-tune the specific inputs and the needs to use biological insights such that you can have high productivity and low environmental side effects. That is something which can be done, is done, but it should also be done in Africa. Leapfrogging from very low productive systems to high productive systems, not going through the long learning curve of using over-input of fertilizers and pesticides, but immediately jumping up to high productive systems with low environmental side effects. And the modern technology, which mobile phone, I suppose, mentioned, is very appropriate to help there. But what is very fundamental there is that the enabling environment is there. That requires political will, and that is now increasing in Africa at different places. We've seen it this morning by the president of Nigeria and the prime minister of Togo, but it is at many places in Africa now there. But it is also necessary to have the right institutions in place. If that's not in place, it's not functioning. Science push is not alone working. An African green revolution, so not repeating what has been done in Asia or in Latin America, an African green revolution requires, in fact, a way of functioning where you make use of the characteristics and make use of the knowledge, expertise, and experience, and where you make use of the best of science. That can be done, but it can only be done when the institutions are in place. But also the conditions should be fulfilled. If we're listening to the property rights, not only in land, but also property rights in seeds. If we are having a policy where we're not working with plant breeders' rights is something which is very helpful for the local breeders, such that they can continue their breeding and can build on the shoulders of their predecessors. That's something which is needed. If it is only owned by a few firms, that's dangerous. And so property rights also there are very vital in creating and stimulating dynamics, creating a situation where agriculture is much more productive as it was before. Right. And then it is also important to understand that agriculture is not agriculture. There are very many different sectors in it. I'm from a country which is very small. It is like the size of Togo, but it is still the second exporter of agricultural produce of the world. And that's due to the fact that it is very high productive agriculture and selling a lot of back knowledge in the form of seeds and things like that. It required, of course, a situation where there is a continuous innovation, stimulated by the university, stimulated by the cooperatives, stimulated by the government, and also creating a situation where you not heavily depend on subsidies, but where you are trying to do it such that it is market-oriented. And I think that's a possibility, that is a challenge for Africa, can be done, it will be done, and should be done.
Jacques and Josette, I'd like to turn to you. I mean, I don't know how you feel or how the audience feels, but I tend to get very frustrated by how obvious and commonsensical it is to introduce or to encourage innovations in agriculture. I mean, it just seems so obvious. Such a large part of the population depends on agriculture, and those who don't depend on it for income certainly depend on it to live. And yet, for the last 60 or 70 years, we continue to have debates on how to encourage or how to expand the agricultural sector. Either the property rights issue hasn't been fixed, the science doesn't seem to be encouraged. And perhaps starting with you, Jacques, and turning to Josette, what is it? Are we just stuck with governments that don't implement things based on common sense?
Well, I believe that governments in a democratic society are elected to lead the people toward better conditions of life. Hence the importance and the vital role of government in agricultural policies. And naturally one of the key elements is to create the right investment environment. Because without resources, naturally, you go nowhere. Naturally, they should be applied properly. If we look at Africa, there's a commitment in Maputo to put 10% of resources of the budget into agriculture. We're on average 5% today. If we look at the private sector, only 10% of the credit is going to agriculture when we have 60 to 80% of the population. We therefore need to have sound macroeconomic management that would allow agriculture to fit into the overall picture of development of the country. That requires, in addition to resources, that the country also be able to correct market imbalances on a short term with price stabilization, price support, subsidies, smart subsidies as we say now, which means that it should be well targeted, it should be temporary, it should address the specific needs of the people who should benefit from the system.
But when you were head of FAO, you must have said this numerous times to numerous governments. Did they just not listen to you?
Thank God some did, and some were successful. and some have been success stories. For many years, I said I was a little embarrassed because I would only mention success stories in Asia and Latin America. But I was happy in my last years to be able to say these are the success stories in Africa. So it means that it can be done and it has been done, but not enough and not in all the countries. And that's why we are still in a situation where 23% of the population is undernourished in Africa against an average of 16 in the world. And yet we have to deal with a population which is growing very fast. And we will be 2 billion by the year 2050, which means that we will represent 22% of world population, more than China, more than India. And that's why I think it's very important that the necessary policies are applied, and naturally that the private sector plays its role. In fact, the farmers are the first representatives of the private sector, and in Africa, 80 to 85% of them have less than 2 hectares in terms of smallholder holdings.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will come back to you to talk to you about those governments that did not listen to you. Josette, do you have a view on this?
Well, first, I think it's important to note that there has been progress. So today, the world's nourishing more people than ever before in human history. We've cut the proportion of hunger in half since 1969 to 2004, but we're not keeping up.
Right.
And we have to feed more people in the next 40 years than in the past 8,000 years combined. And we see after the food crisis that actually more people got thrown into hunger. So we're not doing enough, and we're not doing it fast enough. I'm just going to try to address 4 macro mindsets that I think are hurting us, that need to be innovated, if that's a word. First, I just jotted these down in answer to your question. The first is that hunger or food or agriculture is about the ag minister alone. And I will just say that you mentioned it's about national security. It is about national security. Nothing is more fundamental than feeding populations. In fact, that's why governments way back when were formed around the idea of needing to provide food security for a population. So when it's left just for an ag minister to figure out how a country eats or how we make agriculture profitable, it doesn't work. It's about the finance ministers, it's about the private sector, it's about rallying the population behind it. And I will just say, if you look at the cost of malnutrition alone, it costs an average of about 6% for a country that has a high rate of malnourishment. In some countries, about 11% of GDP. It's been estimated that India loses $24 billion a year to the cost of malnutrition. And yet, there are answers to do it. We don't even need innovations. There's basic policies and examples on the shelf that can transform malnutrition for about $10 billion a year, it's estimated, for all of the least nourished countries. The second mindset I'd point to is this whole idea that this is about charity. The amazing thing about food is it creates jobs up and down the value chain if you address the issue. And so if with just some right policy frameworks and attention, you can create job opportunities for people up and down the value chain. So it's not about charity. It's not an endless charity case at all. The third thing I'd mention is this idea, and I will say it just really applies to many of the debates in the past about Africa, that somehow the world has to save Africa on this front, or has to save Africans from starvation or not eating. And I think this idea of moving from this idea of handouts to then the discussion about hand-ups. Well, we have to kind of work together. And now, as President Obama mentioned on his trip, I was very happy to hear him talking about partnership. So I think this era of partnership can really, we need a mindset change. Again, that this isn't about kind of one-off actions to save something. This is about a handshake between Africa and the world, and it's what Grow Africa is about. It's what AGRA is trying to do, and it's why I support these efforts that create partnership and ensuring that the financing and the processes are together. And then I just want to quote President Jonathan this morning, who said, this isn't about managing poverty, it's about creating wealth. So this whole idea, again, we have to change the mindset that being a farmer is about being poor. And so we've seen, example after example in the world where it is agriculture that can lift a nation out of poverty. We've seen it most recently in Vietnam. We're seeing it happen in Ghana and other countries in Africa. So I think in addition to scientific innovation, we need a macro innovation in the way we think about food, food security, hunger, and agriculture.
Right. Well, that's helpful. I would like to turn to the audience to open it up for questions, but before I do so, Mxolisi Jane, it's not about charity, it's not about handouts, it's about creating wealth. In banking, in smallholder agriculture, capital must be important. What, in your experience, have you seen that has been encouraging about the way funding is now being made available to smallholders, to women farmers, to people who don't have assets? Or is this still an area which you feel as discouraged as you did because you're not seeing anything at all? Maybe I can start with you, Jane.
Yeah, no, I think there's some very good examples. I think this morning we heard about NASO, what is happening in here in Nigeria, and I'm sure Minister Akin will probably talk about it later. But in Kenya, there is also a very good project that happened about 3-4 years ago, started with Equity Bank. And what is nice about the Kenyan issue is that they started with about $5 million with one bank, which was leveraged 10 times to $50 million, lent out to smallholder farmers, and there was zero default rate. There were no claims. The government of Kenya then has now scaled up, and they've put money for the next 10 years in the budget about $30 million, leveraged 10 times, again, so $300 million, and they have actually already tendered to 5 more banks. So it's a very good issue where there was a very good idea, scaled up, and the leadership then took and not driving it. That's a very good example.
Right,
yeah.
right. Are you equally encouraged?
Yeah.
I think that just to pick up from what was said, that it's not about saving Africa. In actual fact, the statistics suggest that around 2030 to 2050, the population of the world will be around 9 billion. And somewhere the reading says that, can the world feed 9 billion? The answer is yes, but not without Africa. It's as simple as that. Because 60% of uncultivated arable land is in Africa. So you can, as Bill Clinton like putting, you can do the math. You can see that, the volume of investment which will be pouring in Africa if we get our acts together in agriculture is massive. And we need to lead the charge. Because, you cannot have a situation where in the past probably 20 years, when you see the volume of money which foreign companies put into cell phones because they saw the return, today we're reaping the benefits. That's why we're talking about this innovation. So from that point of view, we need to get it right simply because if you have a situation where a small farmer in Edo State has got the land, he can plow, but on the other side, he does not have an off-take agreement, and the bank can't give him the money, you got to create what has come to be known as a bank guarantee. And the government spoke about it this morning, such that, in that process where the farmer wants to produce, but he does not have the money, who gives him the money? Who is responsible? But at the same time, when we start recycling that money, when that farmer starts making money, we should not allow a situation where they go and buy expensive cars before they pay back that money, because there is a tendency sometimes among small entrepreneurs and young entrepreneurs and they cannot differentiate between revenue and profit. So they get the revenue and think, I'm making money. But they don't realize that, they have to pay the debt which they have taken, and we don't want to promote this question of just grant. People need to understand that this is business. It's capitalism. If we support it, let's understand the modus operandi and how it operates. So funding will come, and in Nigeria it's good because the government has put all sorts of schemes, and that's why this morning you saw the Minister of Finance, and we have interacted with the Reserve Bank governor, so everybody, understands what the president and what the nation is up to. And as a result, you will find that, the private banks in Nigeria as well are going to fall into that aspect of what is it that the nation is trying to do. Right. But we need to find a good relationship between what is guaranteed, between what the private sector banking is providing, but at the same time, make it a point that it's a revolving scheme which can, after that, be taken and be given to other people so that we don't have a system which fails. Right. Because at the end, it's a new territory. Right. The commercialization of agriculture in Nigeria is new, and we have seen it in South Africa, where South Africa, in actual fact, was not supposed to be farming because the land is not good for farming. But we have put chemicals, we have put all sorts of things, and today you can see that in actual fact, South Africa is feeding the biggest chunk of Africa. So from that point of view, we need to reduce that, and we get into new ways of doing things. We attract investments, and we make it a point that people understand what is it that we are getting into, what is the roadmap in this new territory. If in the medium to long term we fail, let's change the course, let's adjust. But the bottom line is that funding will come when the principle of farming is clear and everybody understands it.
Rudy, you've had some experience in this area.
Yes, I would think that I'm not as pessimistic as my colleague here, because I would think that what we see indeed in the analysis we did 10 years ago, that many poor farmers were caught in a kind of unsustainability spiral due to the fact that they had no property rights, such as in many places still in Africa. And as a result of that, could not get access to commercial credits. And that's why we introduced this system also in AGRA of innovative financing. Now that we see that there is the willingness, in fact, to come over that step, and that also commercial banks and cooperative banks come in, likewise what we've seen in Tanzania and other places, Rabobank, the bank of the biggest food and agri bank of the world, is now stepping in also and giving the commercial credits to farmers. And I think that's something which is very hopeful, and it is very, and I expect that that is going to take off. But what is necessary is first to come to a situation where they can create a situation where they can build up through their entrepreneurship and farming community, which is vital. And for that, it is of course also important not only to look at the whole food systems approach, but also at the supply chains. Demonstrated also earlier on this afternoon when we had the DATCO example. There you were looking also at the whole supply chain, and you give some guarantee that there is some income from products you're producing, in this case cassava, because there is a delivery to the beer industry and the food industry. And so things like that are there. Now, and I think I'm very hopeful that these things are happening nowadays, and the political will is there to stimulate it. There is the will of investors to do it. There's the will of bankers to come in. And what is, I think, needed, what was said by Josette, that the macro environment is changing. And I'm convinced that Africa has lots to offer, a lot to offer because there's a lot of agricultural land, but more importantly, that the yield gap is so enormous. The yield gap of what is being halved at this moment and what is possible with some moderate inputs to come to a higher productivity level. And therefore, Africa has a vital role to play for food security in the world. That's why China is also trying to see whether there are investments in Africa are possible. That's why the Prime Minister is probably, and the President of Nigeria is going this afternoon to China to do negotiations. And that's only the reason for that is that China says we have about 20% of the world population, 8% of the agricultural land of the world. We have to have high productive system, and we would not like to rely completely on input from elsewhere. And if that's the situation, we do it by negotiating with countries such as the countries in Africa. And so, globally looking at this situation, then Africa has a vital role to play in food security, not in the short run, but probably in 10 or 20 years. And I'm convinced that it can be delivered.
It's very helpful, thank you. I mean, before I come back to Jacques to talk about those governments that did not listen to him, maybe we should take a few questions from the audience just to see where your own thinking is going. Are there any questions out there? Please.
Thank you. Maria Kionka, Minister of Finance for Uganda. I'd like to follow up on the comments about land use and access to land. In some countries, the government owns the land on behalf of the people. In other countries, it's like in my own, it's a mix of private ownership and government ownership. I'd like to ask the gentleman from IDG, what kind of innovations, what kind of mechanisms have they come up with in the case of where you have, let's say, an investor who wants to do a plantation on something? You've got a lot of smallholders who don't want to lose their land, who are willing to work with him but don't want to lose their land. What are the kind of mechanisms that are being thought up across Africa? For instance, in Uganda, we're thinking about encouraging long-term leases in much the same way as you take a lease on a building for 10 years. Maybe to have the investors take a long lease and then have the smallholders either work on the land or stay on the land as landlords. But I'm sure there must be a lot of stuff going on in this area. I'd like to hear more about that.
Thank you.
The way I would like to look at this issue, I call it, we need to understand the symbiotic relationship between big farmers and the small farmers. It's a very important issue because in Nigeria, they're suggesting that you have got probably 10 million, farmers. But, you have got probably a situation where some of those farmers, as we have indicated, they cannot go to the bank and they borrow effectively. I listened to the Minister of Agriculture, the other day saying that, if you look at it in the United States, the farmers go and borrow at 4.5%. And I think that in this country, somewhere 15%. in South Africa, when the question of food security was being addressed, there was a land bank of South Africa, which basically was taking care of those farmers. In actual fact, if I may use the word, when we took over in 1994, the land bank was almost bankrupt because so the ANC government say, but how can you operate such, in this way, and there are losses? But what they didn't understand is that during those years, there are lots of things which the land bank tried to address, and as a result, probably it was not a profit-making, institution. Now, this symbiotic relationship between big farms and the smallholders, it's very important because you don't want to alienate the smallholders. Now, the question is, when I say the way I would like to look at it, if you want to build a mall, you go first and get an anchor tenant. The anchor tenant will be the big guys who will pay basically maybe 60% of your renter. And then you look at the small people who will have a small shop there. Now, when you start, all these issues which we are looking at in Nigeria, like you will have big farms, when they get into a situation like in Edo State, we are making a register with the land commissioner who happens to be sitting there in terms of who are the smallholders, for instance, in Edo State. We need to take stock of what is it that they're producing. Can we coexist with them? Because at the end of the day, when you are sitting where you are sitting, the institution like a bank will look at us and say, we can give you money because we know that you can account, we have got a business plan, you are showing us how we are going to make our money in 3-5 years, the returns and all that. But it might be problematic for small farmers basically because they might not be in a position to pay for a business plan which might cost $1.5 million. But we are in a position to do that, and we are in a position to show the investors that we are serious about this thing by virtue of giving them the business plan, which is sound and it can be critiqued. Now, you need to work with the smallholders to say that we are going to be producing, this tonnage of sugarcane to feed into this mill, which will take so much tonnage. Our, land will produce probably 60% of that. The rest, we will be basically be getting it from you, and that is the offtake which I was mentioning at the beginning, that you need then to go to the smallholders that you will have an offtake because your sugar cane which you will produce will be fed into our mill, and we can rely on you because we will help you basically solve some of the issues which you are not in a position to do.
Right.
So those kind of things, absolutely. So that relationship, we need to nurture it, because if the purpose of big farmers is to come into Nigeria and alienate small farmers, then we've got a problem in the future. Okay. They need to exist, because I'm a product of my mother who, when I went to school, sold, kettles to take me to school.
Yeah, no, understood. So that relationship, I think, between large farmers and small farmers is really where that emphasis is. Any other questions? Please.
Of agriculture of Togo. I want to speak French, excuse me. J'ai une inquiétude sur le mécanisme de distribution des engrais. Nous savons que le Nigeria a une riche expérience dans la distribution des engrais. Donc il y a, je dirais, une prise en compte des grosses exploitations, mais en même temps aussi les inquiétudes des petits producteurs. Alors je voudrais demander au ministère du Nigeria, de l'agriculture, comment ils ont réussi à arrimer ce mécanisme de distribution en s'appuyant bien entendu sur les préoccupations des petits producteurs et des les gros producteurs. Nous savons qu'ils ont fait usage des nouvelles technologies et de la, comment dirais-je, l'éthique, les technologies de l'information et de la communication. Mais nous savons que les opérateurs cellulaires, les opérateurs de la téléphonie cellulaire, et ces opérateurs ne couvrent pas toute la superficie du Nigeria. J'ai cru entendre quelque part qu'il y a eu usage des portables. Alors pour les paysans, surtout les petits, qui n'ont pas les moyens, ou du moins qui n'ont pas accès à cette technologie, comment ils ont pu réaliser ces merveilles et en intégrant bien entendu les grosses exploitations et les petites exploitations. C'est ma question.
Okay. Jacques, if I could ask you to respond to that.
Well, that's the Nigerian experience. it's said in French, but the content of the question really, I think, has to be addressed by Nigeria. How did they manage in their program to deal with those who did not have
But as Nigeria isn't represented here, and as you have this global experience.
well, anyway, I'm an old Nigerian. I came here when I was 28 years. Now, I really think that, as I mentioned, most of the people in Africa are now having the cellular phones.
Right.
In fact, I called my guard of my house in Saint-Louis in Senegal. I couldn't reach him. I called him in the afternoon, and I said, "What's wrong? I was not able to get you." He said, "Sorry, I didn't give you the number of my second cell phone." And it's my guard in Saint-Louis. I really think that this problem is being solved.
Yes.
And that you can start already building on the system where there is this availability. And then as the system progresses, then you could develop with the ministers in charge of these new technologies, a way and means by which you could find alternative solutions, which may vary from one country to the other.
We have time for one more question before we wrap up, and I see we have 3. So why don't we take yours, and then we will see what we do about time.
Thank you. My name is Latte Lawson. I'm from Togo, but I'm based in the US. I work for CARE. My question is, what is the vision for food security in Africa? Are we promoting like country-specific food security or cross-border? So, I mean, from the discussion, I haven't heard anything about that. So what is the vision? What type of vision are we promoting for Africa? Is it country-specific or mostly cross-border, where we can, use opportunity from one country to feed another country? And the second one is really about sustainability as well. What are we doing about sustainability in Africa?
Okay. Do you want to give the microphone to the gentleman at the back and then the one in the front, and we'll take all 3 questions, and then the panel can pick.
Good afternoon. My name is John Mason with NCRC in Accra, Ghana. We've heard about the uptake of mobile telephony in Africa and how rapidly that's happened. But I'd like to ask the panel, how come so many other developments, scientific and technological, in this space are not being taken up, are not being adopted, are sitting in research institutions and universities across Africa? The list is as long as my arm, and it's not impressive.
Right. Should we do this? If we can just tackle the 2 questions that have been asked, the low adoption and the question of comparative development. We need low adoption. Do you want to talk to that?
The last question concerning the science and technology on the shelf, which is not in use,
yes.
That's, I think, a very important question, because very often people say, we do not need more information, we do not need more science and technology. It's all on the shelf, take it and use it. That's not true, because very often science and technology should be tuned to the specific needs and the specific circumstances, and if they are not fulfilled, it's not working. Science can only play a role, and it can only be used, and it can only be implemented when the conditions are there to make it work. If that's not the situation, it's not working. The mobile phone is different, because there you have that equipment and you have it, whereas right. In science and technology, in farming and field, all of you probably have plants at home, and if you are trying to feed them and take care of the pests and the diseases, it's a difficult job, and that's not done overnight. And so it's important to know that the knowledge, expertise is needed to do it. And also the conditions under which these things are taking place have to be fulfilled. If that's not the situation, it's not going to work. And that's why it's so important to create an enabling environment, political, socioeconomic, but also all these other elements should be in place. Otherwise, it's not functioning.
So you disagree with the premise of the question?
I give an answer to the question.
Can I jump in on that question?
Please.
There are some technologies, however, that would be enormously helpful, and it reminds me of the whole debate we had some years back about access to vaccines and medicines and the need for new financing mechanisms that would do aggregate purchasing and some kind of catalytic fund at a global level. And so I would say for all these fantastic new technologies that allow for you to fertilize with a tablespoon of water rather than flooding a field, all these things that could be useful, even though we don't have all that would be useful. I think we need some innovative minds to come together and really find how we unleash those for those who can't afford them. It's similar to the clean energy problem we have with clean energy technologies, but I think this could be enormously helpful if we could unlock those.
Do you want to?
I think it's a very good question. If we think about how mobile technology ended up being adopted so fast in Africa, it's because all the elements came together. They came to a continent that was not communicating before, so there was a real need. We then had assumed that the Africans didn't have money to purchase the phone or even indeed to have airtime. That will prove that that is not true, because we hear that I would rather not eat but buy a telephone, whatever, a nice newest handset. Then there was private companies. The private companies aggressively marketed the technology. The government supported this because in a way it aided them in whatever they were doing. So it's when elements come together. And I think the challenge of agriculture, we've not yet hit that sweet spot between government, private sector, farmer, and the scientists. And the day we do that, the whole integrated chain has a good value proposition for everybody, it will be a bombshell. And I think we are headed there, but not yet. I think what we are lacking, to your earlier question, is leadership. Within the mobile telephony, the private sector led that because they were making money. In this one of agriculture, the question is, and I think because we are very brilliant in this room, we need to start answering, who's going to take the leadership?
Right. And Jane, if I could ask you to comment on the other question on sustainability.
Yeah. And again, it comes to sustainability. The reason, I think the question was, are we driving pan-regional things or individual? Mm-hmm. For the question I've just tried to answer, leadership, you have to start with the national government. Because when you leave Senegal and you go to Nigeria, they are all very different, and they have different mandates to their people. So for sustainability, you have to align with what Senegalese want to do, to what Nigerians want to do, so it can be sustainable. And then you can get to ECOWAS, then you can get to AU. And I think that's a journey generally people are taking. I think we are trying to be sustainable because we don't want to make the mistakes that have been made in other places like India during the Green Revolution that Rudy was talking about. But there is a sustainability agenda, I think, in everybody around this panel, and we are trying to get that. But please, and again, it's back to leadership. Who is a leader?
Right. I see Namanga has his hand up, and I can't not call Namanga.
I'm sorry for taking the mic late, but I am Namanga Ngongi, a farmer. I just want to make a comment that innovation is fine, but there's an old area of agriculture that really needs to be innovated. That's extension. If you have, let me go back to the Greeks, more than 3,000 years ago, he said, he who knows but cannot let others know what he knows is the same level as he who does not know. So if we have all these great technologies on shelves, but we cannot let people, the farmers, know that they exist and demonstrate them, farmers, that they will give them profit, that they are going to change their livelihoods by using them, then we have the same level as the farmers who do not know. So we do need to innovate how to bring about an effective extension service that will engage farmers and turn them into entrepreneurs, profitable entrepreneurs, using technologies that exist today while we are still innovating to have new technologies.
Thank you. And if we could take a last question. That's it. Thank you very much. I can see there are more questions than we have time for. I am sorry. I can see there are more questions than we have time for. But so unfortunately, I have to ask you to talk to the panelists individually offline. And thank you very much for your participation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Please join us in the foyer for a short